guys! So I have purchased the Hypnobabies home study kit, and a big part of preparing for birth with Hypnobabies is letting go of negative birth associations and only allowing yourself to take in positive affirmation and positive stories. So I know I've talked about wanting to make a video of Cal's birth story, and because his birth was so negative and so traumatic for me, I think it's important to get that out of the way now and be able to let it go and continue with Hypnobabies and prepare for a more positive experience with Squish. So Cal was born in November of 2011. He was due on November 26th, and on November 23rd I had my scheduled prenatal appointment, and they told me at the previous appointment the week prior that if I were still pregnant and still coming in for this appointment, that they would start to discuss induction, because then I would be past my due date, the week following. So I knew it was going to be kind of an important appointment just for that reason. The night before, Jake, our beagle, was acting really clingy and weird, and I was pretty much due. I had a hospital bag packed, but I didn't have it in the car. Something told me to bring it to my appointment, but I didn't, and I wish I would have listened to my intuition. So I went in what I thought was going to be just a normal appointment. When they took my blood pressure, it was still high. It had been high most of the time for about 4 weeks, from right when we had moved to Virginia from San Diego. It had started going high. It wasn't super high, but it was higher than normal. And they had been monitoring it, and I had gone to labor and delivery 3 separate times to be monitored for a few hours and doing the urine samples to see about protein in my urine, to see if it was preeclampsia. The levels of the protein were rising each time they checked it, but they were still well below the preeclampsia, threshold, but they were going up. So I get to this appointment and it was still kind of high, so she took it another couple of times later in the appointment and it was still kind of high, so she told me that I should go down the hall to labor and delivery and have them assess it further. Justin was there with me since I knew it was going to be kind of an important appointment, and he worked there at that same naval hospital, and he had gotten off work early that day, and he was hanging out with his friends who live in the apartments right outside the hospital. So he met me in for my appointment, and he was there already. So we went down the hall together over to labor and delivery, and they started taking my blood pressure, and it was a little bit higher than they liked. And so they decided they were going to run some blood tests for preeclampsia. And the OB, his name was Dr. Baxter, he asked me if I wanted to be induced, and I said yes and no. I mean, I didn't really want to be induced. I was wanting to have a natural labor, and so I was, trying like heck to not get induced. And over the past couple weeks, I had been trying to get things started more naturally, because I knew that medical induction was looming with the blood pressure issues. And I said yes just because that morning I had woken up at 5 in the morning literally drowning in acid reflux, and it was just ridiculous, and I was just sick of it, and the medicine wasn't helping, but I still really mostly did not want to be induced. So he went to go get the labs done to see if it was preeclampsia or not, and he ran into an attending, and the attending said if I were his patient, he would definitely induce regardless of if the labs indicated preeclampsia or not. So he came back and he kind of didn't make it seem like it was a choice anymore. He said that that was the best thing, that it was definitely full term and we should induce. So he started talking about the risks of induction, and of course that freaked me out because that's exactly why I didn't want one. It was taking my blood pressure like every 10 minutes. I took it while he was talking to me, and it came out as 164 over 103. So it was definitely high that time, and he said kind of nervously, I take responsibility for that one because I was freaking you out. It was mainly around mid to high 140s over like mid 90s prior to that. He was surprised that I was already 3 centimeters dilated. Because of those measures that had been taken, I had been having some prodromal labor over the past several days where I would have regular contractions as close as 5-6 minutes apart for up to a few hours at a time. And they weren't very uncomfortable, which was nice, but they definitely were making progress because I was 3 centimeters and 75% effaced already. So I did tell him I did not want Cytotec, and he asked me why, and I told him because of the research I had done that I didn't feel that it was safe to use. And he said, well, the good news was we probably didn't need to do any cervical ripeners because I was already so far dilated. My cervix was favorable that going straight to Pitocin should be enough to get things started. So they got me in the hospital gown, got the IV in. I texted my doula Amanda and let her know I was being induced, so she was on her way. And just as they got me into the delivery room and were hanging the bag of Pitocin is exactly when Amanda walked in. Perfect timing. And so Justin left to go get my hospital bag and make arrangements for Jake, our dog. At that point, my blood pressure was back to about where it had been, which was somewhat high, but not dangerously high. It was 148/96. The first nurse I had was a very sweet Filipino lady, and I only had her for a very short time though, because it was almost shift change once they started the Pitocin about 5 p.m. or so. I also texted my birth photographer, Jenny, and she told me to call her when I was in active labor, so about 6 centimeters, and that she'd come then. So the contractions were starting, and at first they were really, really mild. It just felt like period cramps, like nothing major at all. We had the TV on, and it was Willy Wonka. And Amanda and I just watched the movie and chatted while Justin went home, and then he came back. I got my new nurse, her name was Christy, and she was wonderful. She was very, very supportive of the kind of birth I wanted. And we talked about, briefly just about that I didn't want to have any medical pain relief, and that I wanted to push sitting up, preferably with Justin behind me, and she said that was not a problem. They break down the bed anyway. Every time a doctor came in, Christy would tell them I wanted a natural birth, and she was always just like telling me I was doing a really good job. Like every time she saw me, she was just very supportive. It was really helpful having her there. So around 8 p.m. or so was the first time they checked me, and I was still at 3 centimeters, so it was a little bit more effaced. It was more like 90%. My water bag was bulging. She asked me if I wanted her to break it, and I said no. So I tried out some other positions. I sat on the birthing ball for a while. Caledon did not like the Doppler. He kept moving away from it, so Christy had to keep coming back in and adjusting it and making sure that it was just that he moved and not that something was wrong. When I was sitting on the birthing ball, I was holding it in place. By then the contractions were getting stronger, but I was still fairly comfortable. It was still pretty easy to get through them. I was getting a lot of texts and notifications on Facebook of support from family and friends, which was also really helpful. And then another 2 hours or so had gone by, and the OB came back in to check again, and I was still at 3 centimeters. She asked me again if I wanted my water broken, and again I said no. So I tried some more time on birthing ball, I tried some time standing, but then I was starting to feel more pressure, and it didn't feel comfortable to me, so I didn't like it, and I got back in bed sitting upright. I was starting to feel really hungry, because by then it was about 10 p.m. and I hadn't eaten in about 12 hours or so, and I didn't eat very much before I went, because I just, I wasn't planning on going and having a baby that day. So Amanda went and asked if I could have a popsicle, and they said yes. I didn't even know that was an option, so doulas are awesome, they know stuff like that. So I was eating the popsicle, and it was the best cherry popsicle I've ever had in my life. It was amazing. It just tasted so good just to eat anything. Justin was starting to get tired by about midnight because he had been up since about 4:30 in the morning to go to work. So Amanda told him to take a nap, and so she took over, totally supporting me. And contractions just kept getting stronger and closer together, and they were about 2 minutes apart at that point. And so when they came and checked, again, I was still at 3 centimeters. I was really surprised to hear that, because it was actually starting to hurt, and I actually had to start concentrating to focus on the contractions. I couldn't talk through them at all anymore. I finally just told her, break my water, like I'm tired of this. So she tried to. At first she couldn't break it, it was too hard. So she came back a little bit while later, and then she was able to break it. At that point it was about 2:20 in the morning. And it felt really gross. I didn't like how it felt. It's just really warm and weird. So Amanda woke up Justin and told him they broke my water. Amanda said after having my water broken, my contractions would hurt more, and she was not kidding. They definitely hurt more. A little while later, not much later, like maybe 30 minutes tops, the OB came back in and she wanted to put in an internal catheter monitor, which measures how strong the contractions are on your uterus. They wanted to make sure they were strong enough, but they didn't want to increase the Pitocin if it wasn't necessary to. So I do appreciate that part of it. But she didn't make it sound like it was a choice in the matter of having the internal monitor, and since she put that in, she told me I was not able to get out of bed anymore, which I've heard conflicting information about since then, but she told me I couldn't get out of bed. So she put that in, and my water just kept gushing, and it was so gross. It feels like you're peeing yourself and you can't stop it. It's really annoying. And I don't know if it was from the water gushing or me like moving just a little or something, but that monitor fell out, and I didn't realize it, but I was having contractions, and Amanda's like, it's not registering that you're having contractions, and I'm like, I'm definitely having contractions. And the OB came in and said it had fallen out and she had to put it back in. Maybe that's when she told me I couldn't get it. I don't know, but by that point, her putting it back in, I had already gotten to 4 centimeters. So finally I was making some progress, and I was happy about that. The contractions were definitely hurting more. I needed to concentrate more and more to get through them. We figured out something that helped me. Amanda gave me acupressure between my thumb and forefinger. It's for your uterus. So whenever a contraction would start, I would like put my hand out and she would do it, and it really took the edge off. I don't know why it works, but it does. It helped a lot. I mean, it definitely still hurt, but it hurt less. I was able to handle it better. At that point, I started getting some back-to-back, which I really hated a lot. And my fluids kept gushing, which I really hated a lot. At one point, I actually had to pee, and since I couldn't get out of bed, they brought a bedpan, and that was really awkward trying to get positioned over that, especially trying to like not have the monitor fall out. I'm not entirely sure if I aimed correctly or not. Regardless, Christy also changed my sheets after that because my water still had been gushing over. I started changing positions more and more. You know, I'd be sitting up, right, and then I'd move to one side, and then move to my other side, and just feeling very restless. And Christy like noticed that, and she said she was sure that I was in active labor just because of how I was acting. Sure enough, on the next check, I was 7 centimeters. So Amanda was really surprised because that was pretty fast progress in about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less. For a first-time mom. I was relieved because I'm like, all right, we've gotten the bulk of it over, more than halfway there. You know, 7 centimeters is supposedly the start of transition. Like, this should be the beginning of the end. It's almost time. This is great. And they were definitely very close together, and I definitely couldn't do anything else during them. So my mom was asking me for an update, and all I had time to type was 7. And on Facebook, I just put transition, and that was all I could do in between. From that point forward, things get really fuzzy, but at some point in there, they were getting tired of Caledon moving away from the Doppler monitor, so they put the internal one into his scalp. And my IV also fell out at one point, and they had to put it back in, and Amanda got to help her do that, and she said that was her favorite part. And Amanda was like, oh yeah, we have to call Jenny because you're in transition. So I'm like, oh yeah. So she went and called her for me. She left the room and called her and then came back. Somewhere in between there, I couldn't have the TV on anymore. I was just like, turn off the TV. This is driving me nuts. Jenny came, and she like settled in. She was being really quiet and unassuming, which was nice. I think she got there somewhere around 4 or maybe 5 in the morning. I was starting to get really sick. I started vomiting a lot, and that was not fun. It was like very violently vomiting. Amanda was like trying to be encouraging, like, this is good, this means you're really close. I started getting really tired because I'd been awake so long. So it got to the point where I was falling asleep in between contractions. And I was starting to have more and more of the ones back to back, which is just really annoying. So you feel it coming on and it peaks and it starts to go and you're like, all right, it's almost over. And then it's like, nope, here's another one. And you're like, no. And I just kept saying like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. And I started like thinking in my head, I didn't say it out loud, but I was like, I can kind of understand now why some women want epidurals. Like, I can see why it'd be tempting to just be like, all right, that's it, I'm done. But I still really didn't want one, so I didn't ask for one. But it was definitely not easy anymore to get through them at all. And I was trying to vocalize, keep it low. Amanda would, make sure I was doing it low enough. She would make sure I was keeping my face relaxed. If I started furrowing my brow, she would touch it to like remind me to relax my face. My next check I was at 8 centimeters, so it's getting closer. And Christy kept telling me again how good I was doing, and she's like, next time it should be a piece of cake. You should definitely be able to have a natural labor next time. It'll be much shorter and easier for you. So at 7 a.m. it was shift change again, and this new nurse was bad. I should have asked for a new nurse. I did not like her at all. And just from the second she walked in, Amanda gave her just a brief overview. I want a natural birth, and she rolled her eyes at her. Literally, I swear. I also told her about how I wanted to push, and she's like, well, if the OB says it's okay, and Amanda's like, well, the other 2 nurses said it was fine because we have to break down the bed anyway, and she was just not supportive. Somewhere in there they started giving me oxygen. I think that was before the internal monitor. I'm not sure, but every now and then I had the oxygen mask on my face. It would get really annoying and hot, and just ironically it made me feel stifled. Like I couldn't breathe even though I'm getting oxygen. It's stuffy. I didn't like it. So if I didn't have it on my face, I had it like right here on my neck. After a while, I started feeling a lot of pressure, and I kept saying out really loud, I have to poop. And then I don't remember this part, but Amanda says that she remembers it like clear as day. I sat bolt upright, and I said, nails, I feel nails. And she went to go get the OB, and they checked me, and they're kind of making some faces, and they're like, you're at a 6. Wait, hold on. And then they left, and they brought in another OB that was more experienced or higher rank or something. They also were like, is that a yeah. And all of a sudden it just hurt a lot more, and pressure, and I was just like, and then a contraction came on, and then I was just, no, I couldn't, like, I was literally trying to claw away the bed rails, and it was really, really bad. And so then they stopped, and they said that his hand was there, that that's what they were feeling was his hand. His arm was like this, and they had tried to push him up without telling me anything, thank you, and that's why it hurt too bad and I couldn't tolerate it. So they said with his arm like that, they would not deliver him. They absolutely refused. They would not deliver him, so I could either get a C-section, wait and see if he'd move it back on his own, or get an epidural so I could tolerate them pushing him back. So they said they would leave and give me a couple minutes to talk about it with Justin and Amanda. So the reason they said they wouldn't deliver him that way is because they said that he might damage the nerves in his arm. It might cause permanent damage. He might break his arm, or he might get stuck because it opened up his shoulders more. I don't know, but they just wouldn't do it. I was kind of half inclined to just let things continue, but the thought of, it had been so rough and hard to get through, and I was already so tired, and the thought of going through hours more and still ending up in a C-section anyway at the end sounded really awful. And he was at 0 station already, so I didn't even know if he was even able to put his hand back himself at that point. So we agreed that the best course of action would be to get the epidural and try to get them to push him back so that we can try to have a vaginal birth still. So they came back And we told them that. So they told me I could have one person in the room while I got the epidural, and I didn't think Justin would want to do it because he doesn't like seeing me in pain, which is exactly why we had a doula in the first place. So I asked for Amanda, and then he kind of looked a little sad, and he said he wanted to be there for me. So I was like, oh yeah, I want you there, I just didn't think you wanted to be there, so sure, yeah, you. So Justin stayed, and he did really good. So they had him on a stool in front of me, and I had my feet on his thighs, and he held on my hands, and he stayed really calm, and he did a really good job at keeping me really calm. I was so scared to move at all. Like, I was scared even just shivering or breathing or like the slightest movement, I was gonna like be paralyzed forever. I hated it. The anesthesia guy, I don't know if he was an anesthesiologist or a CRNA, but he walked in and he's like, oh, this is gonna hurt less than your IV did, which turned out it was wrong. But supposedly that most of the time it doesn't hurt as much as an IV. I don't know. I don't remember him really going over risks with me. They did give me the consent form, which had things listed, but you know, I was in transition. I was not gonna, like, there's no way you can read that and like digest that. They turned off the Pitocin, but I was still contracting. First, when he was putting in the epidural, first it wasn't so bad, but then all of a sudden I got this really deep, sharp pain. It felt like it was like in my spine. It's really hard to describe, but just something, it didn't feel right. And I even like cried out in pain because it was just so ow. And he like stopped and he's like, what? You scared me. Like, I thought your leg went numb or something. And I was like, no, it just hurt really bad. And he was just like, oh, okay. But it's just something, I just knew something wasn't right. I didn't think it was supposed to hurt like that, but it hurt really bad. So before long he was done, but my blood pressure started going down and down and down. And I was like, oh yeah, of course now my blood pressure's fine. And then they're like, no, that's the epidural. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have known that. But then it got too low, and then he had to give me something, I don't know what it was, but it was some injection, and it fixed it. When he left the room, he left the syringe sitting out. I don't know, anyway. But I noticed like immediately my legs and hips started feeling so much better. I hadn't realized how much they hurt until then, but it makes sense being stuck in bed for several hours in active labor that they would hurt. But that was the first thing I noticed, was just the relief of my legs being able to feel comfortable again. And then I could still feel contractions though, but as the minutes went by I could feel them less and less, but I still wasn't like totally numb. And the OBs walked back in, it seemed like right away. It didn't seem like they gave much time for it to kick in. So as they started, Amanda was right there holding my hand, but the nurse that I didn't like literally pushed her out of the way and then told me to hold her hand as hard as I wanted. So I went for it because I did not care if I hurt her or not, especially when she pushed my doula out of the way. That was really rude. I was on my side, and the epidural was definitely working enough for me to be able to tolerate them doing this, but it definitely still hurt a lot because it hadn't kicked in all the way yet. But I was able to tolerate it. I was able to get through it. But the OB literally had one foot on the bed, and she was putting her whole body into it. It was nuts. And then she was able to do it. So she stepped back, and I kind of got back to sitting upright, and she was taking off her glove, and I'm not kidding, like, literally the blood was up to here on her arm. And I was like, oh my god, I cannot believe her whole arm. That's really freaky. Anyway. So there was just blood everywhere because it was all over her arm, and it was like dripping on the floor, and wow, it looked, yeah. And Amanda said she just wanted to hug me really bad, and it was just the strangest thing she'd ever seen in the births that she had attended. I don't remember if they walked out after that or if they were still in the room, but like almost immediately Cal's heart rate went into a decel in about the 60 range, and so it was either them coming back or more, but all of a sudden there were people running in the room, and they like flipped me on my hands and knees really fast with my butt up in the air, like so fast that my gown was like on my back, so like my whole like naked butt was like, hi, everyone can see it. That was a little awkward, and they were like, oh, Munchkin didn't like that, and they told me, okay, we're gonna give you 7 minutes for his heart rate to recover before we take you to the OR. So they tried really hard to let me have my vaginal birth still, which I appreciate that part of it too. But this is where things hit the fan. At some point, somebody injected something into my shoulder, and it was only after she injected me that she told me, okay, I gave you something to stop the contractions, which I'm assuming is adrenaline. And she told me that it would make my heart race and maybe I'd be shaky. But that's like the first thing that happened that really made me mad looking back on it. She could have taken 5 seconds to tell me that before she injected me instead of just bam and then telling me. Like, it's just courtesy, you know? My contractions did stop though, so it worked. So I closed my eyes and I had the oxygen back on my face, and I was like taking as deep breaths as I could, and I just started praying really hard because I knew a C-section was not what I wanted, and I was scared for him because I knew he's in danger now, and that was scary. And I also knew that this would have implications on any future pregnancies and births, and it was just sucked that I had gone through all that and did so well, and it was just falling, like it was just going to crap. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and at some point the attending had come in and he put his hand on my shoulder and he was like, I'm the attending and don't worry, I'm going to take really good care of you guys. And then he started talking to Justin, and I looked up and Justin's like putting on the cap and putting stuff, and his hands are shaking and he's freaking out and he's nodding and he's like listening to him, but he was very scared, I could tell. And so then the 7 minutes were up and they said, okay, well, we'll check it again when we get in there, and if his heart rate is fine when we get in there, then we'll just bring you back. And Amanda said, told me after the fact that she watched the monitor the whole time and he did not recover. It stayed in the 60s and 70s that entire time. So he was definitely in prolonged fetal distress. So it was definitely an emergency. So at least that part of the whole thing was necessary. As they were wheeling me out, some guy handed me something and told me to drink it. So yet another, to this day have no idea what it was. Like, again, it would have been nice to just tell me what it is. That's all. I know it's an emergency, but say this is blank and you need it because blank. That's it. I was crying. Nobody was talking to me. Everyone looked freaked out. They get me into the OR, and immediately the OB is screaming like, where's the corpsman? Where's the corpsman? The corpsman comes up and he starts dry shaving me, and I could feel him shaving, and I was like, that's probably not a good sign. Sure enough, they started poking me with a scalpel and I could feel the sharpness. The anesthesia guy, which is the same anesthesia guy, was like, are you sure it's sharp? And they tried again and I said, yes, it's sharp. And he looks at me, this also pisses me off, and he goes, now be honest with us. You know, you're not going to be totally numb, you're going to feel pressure and stuff. So are you sure that it's sharp? I don't want to have to put you under. Are you sure that you feel sharp and not just that you feel the poking? And I was like, no, it's sharp. And he's like, okay. So then the OB's like starting to really freak out, and she's like, we have to get out, and the anesthesia guy is like, give me 30 more seconds, and she's like, they're all just like, yeah, there's all these people in there, and I'm asking where Justin is, and no one is talking to me, no one is comforting me, no one is reassuring me. It's just chaos, and it's bright and it's cold and it's just chaos, and I'm freaked out too. And then it makes me even more freaked out that the professionals are freaked out. And finally she just goes, it's been 13 minutes, we have to get him out now. She is more numb down low, I'm just gonna start. And she cuts, which I felt. I'm sorry. It was partially numb, so I didn't feel the entire brunt of it, but I did feel her cut. It was stinging and it burning and it hurt, and at that point I just lost it. I was freaking out. I was like, I can feel that, I can feel that, I can feel that. Where's my husband? Where's my husband? And that's the last thing I remember until I heard a voice say, your husband's here. and I opened my eyes, and there were 3 people looking down at me, and I was so dizzy that I couldn't figure out which one was him. And he started talking to me, and I could hear him talking to me. I knew I was awake and I wasn't dreaming, but I was hallucinating. I was seeing shapes and like red Aztec patterns, and it was very odd, and I didn't know what was happening to me because the anesthesiologist never told me. And then like off in the distance I just barely like heard Cal cry, and so I said, is that the baby? You know, so I was still so out of it, like of course it was the baby, but they're like, yeah. So I didn't even realize he had been born. No one had like told me or showed him to me. I had no idea. I completely missed it. I actually was not put under, but I still missed it anyway. And it turns out so did Justin. They wouldn't let him in until Cal was out. So finally they bring him around to show him to me, and I was just so dizzy. I couldn't focus on his face. It was just fuzzy, and no matter how hard I tried, it was like being really, really, really drunk, where the room's just spinning and you're trying to focus on something and you can't. Jenny had sent in her camera with Justin, and so one of the nurses took some pictures, and they took one of us as a family, but I couldn't take my eyes off of him because I was still trying so desperately to see his face and like get a good look at him. Especially because we hadn't decided on a name. We were waiting to meet him, and so it was like, he needs a name and I need to look at him, and I can't even see his face. It turns out he was born at 9:37 a.m. He weighed 8 pounds and 11 ounces and 21.5 inches long. His first APGAR was a 6 because he was a little limp when they took him out. His second APGAR was 9. They took him off in an incubator, and Justin was like, you sure you want me to go with him? I said, yeah, go with him. So he left, and I was back like being in and out of, I don't know, consciousness. I don't know if I was losing consciousness or falling asleep. I don't know what it was, but like just chunks of time were just black and nothing. I kept, waking up and hearing the surgeons talking. It was like small talk or something. I don't remember what they were talking about, but one of the times the attending was there. I recognized his voice, and he realized I was kind of lucid, and he said, hey, I'm doing the double stitch so you can have a VBAC. Next thing you know, they're wheeling me into recovery, and the mean nurse was back, and she poked me with something. It felt like a toothpick. I don't remember what it was, but it was to figure out how far up I was numb, and I was numb all the way up to my collarbone. And I told her I could not move anything, except I could just barely move my left arm, but it still felt really heavy and uncoordinated and weird. And then she looked at me and said, do you need to vomit? And I said, actually I do. And she just kind of handed me one of the little back things and turned back to like talk to the nurse she was talking to. And so I was like struggling because I could like barely lift my head, and I was like trying to aim it, and I couldn't really get it in there, and it was running down the side of my face, and no one ever wiped my face off or helped me. Her and the nurse started looking up what I had been given to make sure it was safe to breastfeed, and that's the only reason I found out that I had been given ketamine, and that's why I was hallucinating and so out of it and just so overly medicated. My blood pressure was dangerously low. It got as low as 70/40, and they were medicating me further to try to fix that. It took some time, and then gradually they raised the head of the bed up more and more over time, and they kept checking my numbness, and it was still pretty far up. I had like this strong urge to move my legs. They felt so restless, but I could not move them. It was a really annoying feeling. I did not like that at all. And then the nurse, it was Thanksgiving morning by then, and the nurse left to go to the potluck. So she just left me there, and a random other nurse was walking by and saw my foot hanging off the bed and came and fixed it for me. Amanda came by for a little quickly, and I told her to go home. Same with Jenny. Justin came by for a little bit, and he said Cal had a slight heart murmur, but they weren't concerned about that because I guess it's somewhat common for newborns, something about their own heart resetting. His blood sugar was great, and they were giving him a bath, and I hadn't gotten to go look at him, but Justin said he thought that he was definitely a Caledon because he wasn't cooperating. So he went off to go get some food because he was starving. The attending came, and he was like big baby, which, okay, he was kind of big, but he wasn't that big. He was still average-ish. But he again reiterated that he had done the double layer, so I could have a VBAC. He said ideally it'd be best to wait 2 years, birth to birth, and then I'd be an excellent candidate for a VBAC and should have no problem having a natural birth. I was in recovery for about 3 hours, give or take. I still could not move my legs, which usually you're supposed to be able to move your legs before they'll let you leave. The nurse called to get permission because I met all the other criteria, and they said okay. So 2 corpsmen came, they wheeled me up to my room, and then they had to lift me into the new bed, which I felt bad for them. A little bit later, they brought me Thanksgiving meal. It had everything, including pumpkin pie, so it was so great to finally eat again. I felt like I hadn't eaten in days. I was starving. And I asked about my baby, and she said she'd find out. A little bit after that, the peds came in and said that Cal's blood sugar had gone too low, which, duh, he had been over 3 hours and he hadn't eaten, and newborns usually eat within the first hour. So they told me that they would have to either give him formula or admit him to the NICU and give him an IV. So I asked him, well, can't I breastfeed him? And she said, well, since you can't walk, you can't go to him. Which I think is really stupid. There's wheelchairs in hospitals. So they would not let me go to him. And they would not let him come to me because he had low blood sugar, so he couldn't be released from the nursery. So I went for the formula because that was less invasive. And Justin and I took a short nap because there was nothing else to do. Just more and more time went by, and I kept asking the corpsman about my baby, and you know, she came in periodically to take my vitals and check my bleeding. And so then she called down, and they said that she could wheel me down there in a wheelchair because I still couldn't walk. So why they couldn't have done that before, I don't know, but they let me come down and see him. At that point, it was probably about 6 p.m. at least, I think, and he was sleeping. He slept the entire time. They only let me stay there for like 5 minutes. Got a good look at him, at least I agreed his name was Caledon. But it was just very surreal, because on one hand it's like, this is my baby, and on the other hand, this is my baby. Like, it felt like he wasn't mine, and he didn't know I was there. He was just sleeping in his swaddle. So then they told me I had to go, which I don't even know why. And so I went back to my room, and about an hour later, Amanda had just come back to help me with breastfeeding, and they wheeled him in like right after she got there. She once again had perfect timing. So finally got to hold him skin to skin and nurse him and see him awake about 9 hours after he was born, maybe 10. The lactation consultant was gone, so I had Amanda and one of the nurses who knew a little bit about breastfeeding to help me latch on. He couldn't latch, so we had to get a nipple shield to get him to be able to latch on, which way down the road we realized was we ended up being because he had a tongue tie, that he had problems latching. But I ended up needing to use that nipple shield for 3 months. So that's it. So that's why it was traumatic, is it very quickly stopped being about me being a person in a life-altering, important day of my life to, I don't know, I just wasn't treated like a person anymore. I understand an emergency, they don't have time to explain every little thing to me and get my consent, but at least just tell me, just give me a heads up, just treat me like I'm a person and you care. And I think the two things that stick out to me is in the OR how I was basically ignored while everyone freaked out around me, and missing him being born and not being able to hold him all day long for the first day of his life. For months afterwards, I would think about it and just cry and cry. Like, first hour or two of baby's life, they are meant to bond with their mom. They're meant to be held and nursed and get to know their mom, and he was not by himself, but he was sitting in a plastic bin in the nursery, not being held by anybody, and wondering where I was. And that just breaks my heart, and it always will. I don't think I will ever get over that. Ever. So, and what's really infuriating to me now, like, for the longest time I still had somewhat positive feelings about it, because hey, they tried to give me my vaginal birth, and hey, it was just the way things went, it was just a fluke, and I knew that the C-section was necessary. I knew that his life was in danger and they saved his life. But my new OB, my first appointment with Dr. Andrews, he said, hey, when he put his arms up, like, he made a face, like, that's really stupid, because that's just called compound presentation. That's a variation of normal. They should have just, he didn't understand why they wouldn't deliver him that way, that is normal and it's fine. And they shouldn't have told me I couldn't deliver him that way. And they definitely should not have pushed him up. He said that is stupid because, hey, it's not even a problem. And B, it usually doesn't work. And C, it's risky, especially when the membranes are ruptured, which they were. And yeah, sure enough, it did cause a cord problem, and that's why he went into distress. So, yeah, they saved his life, but because they were intervening too much is the reason why his life was in danger in the first place. They should have let it be. They caused it, and so anyway, I'm just glad that I know going forward into Squish's birth that something like that's not going to happen, because he's not like that. But it was just very traumatic, and it actually wasn't until the past a few months that I even realized how traumatic it was. And it sucks when people kind of discount that. Well, your son's healthy and you're healthy, and yeah, a healthy mom and healthy baby is important. I mean, that is the goal that everybody wants when they're going into a birth, but it just dismisses what I went through, and birth trauma is real, and it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate that my son is alive and healthy. It doesn't mean that I don't realize that it could have been much worse. I understand that. It doesn't mean that I think that all C-sections are evil. Like, I understand that they're necessary sometimes, but it still was handled poorly in the way that I was treated, and the lasting impression it had on me, and how the day I became a mother was almost totally ruined because of how it was handled. So I'm going to try to let it go as much as I can. Obviously, it's going to affect me probably for the rest of my life to some extent. I won't forget it, but it's just this important rite of passage day is just marred with these feelings and memories, and it really sucks, but I'm going to try to let go of that as much as I can so I can focus on only positive things for my baby, who is due in about 11 weeks or so. So anyway, sorry this was really long, so if you got through it all, well, thank you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, and we'll see how this next birth goes.